What do you think of when you hear the word Titanic? Most people imagine a giant ship. They see it sailing across the dark, cold Atlantic Ocean. Suddenly, a massive iceberg appears out of the blackness. The ship strikes the ice, and a great gash is torn in its side. The unsinkable ship begins to go down. This is the story we have all heard. It is the story told in books and famous movies. It is a tale of tragedy, heroism, and the unforgiving power of nature. We remember the band playing on the deck and the lifeboats being lowered into the icy sea. This single dramatic moment, the collision with the iceberg, has defined the Titanic disaster for over a century. But what if that isn't the only story? What if someone who was there, someone who lived through that terrible night, remembered it differently? This is the story of Vaghinak Byurat. He was a survivor of the Titanic. His experience was not about an iceberg. He never saw one. For him, the disaster began not with a sudden crash, but with a series of confusing and terrifying events. His tale adds another layer of mystery to a night already filled with unanswered questions. It reminds us that every person on that ship had their own unique and personal story of survival, loss, and unbelievable fear, and not all of them fit into the simple narrative we know so well. Vaghinak Byurat's account challenges our understanding of the disaster. He was an Armenian man traveling from Constantinople, hoping to start a new business in America. He was educated and observant, keeping a detailed memory of everything he saw and felt. His version of events starts with a series of loud explosions, not the grinding sound of ice against steel. He believed something had gone terribly wrong deep inside the ship's engine rooms. This alternative perspective forces us to look beyond the iceberg and consider other possibilities, adding depth and complexity to the well-known tragedy. It is a powerful reminder that history is often a collection of individual truths, each one adding a piece to a much larger puzzle. His story is a testament to the chaos and confusion of that night. While others on the deck might have been looking for the iceberg that doomed them, Vaghinak and his friends were reacting to a different kind of terror. They were running from the sounds of machinery tearing itself apart and the sight of smoke pouring from places it should not have been. His journey through the sinking ship was one of instinct and survival, guided by his own senses and experiences. It is a narrative that stands apart, a personal account of the Titanic disaster that offers a fresh and compelling perspective on one of history's most famous shipwrecks, proving that even a story we think we know can hold surprising new secrets. The RMS Titanic was a marvel of its time, a floating palace of dreams. Do you know when it began its first and only voyage? The great ship departed from Southampton, England, on April 10, 1912. It was a symbol of progress and luxury, carrying over 2,000 souls toward a new life in America. Among those passengers was Vaghinak Byurat, a young man with his own American dream. He was not a wealthy first-class passenger, but an ambitious scholar and businessman from Constantinople. He carried with him a collection of valuable books, planning to sell them and open his own bookstore in the United States, a world away from his home. Vaghinak was a well-educated man who had studied at a prestigious Armenian school. His journey was not just a simple trip across the ocean. It was a significant step towards a future he had carefully planned. He boarded the Titanic in Cherbourg, France, feeling the excitement that filled the air. The ship was grander than anything he had ever imagined. It was a city on the water, bustling with people from all walks of life, each with their own hopes and reasons for making the transatlantic crossing. For Vaghinak, the Titanic was the vessel that would carry him to prosperity and a new beginning, a promise of success waiting for him in a land of opportunity. He was traveling in second class, a comfortable and respectable section of the ship. Unlike many third-class passengers who were fleeing poverty or persecution, Vaghinak was a man of means, albeit modest ones. He was making a strategic business move, investing his knowledge and his precious book collection in the promise of America. He was a thoughtful and observant passenger, taking in the sights and sounds of the magnificent liner. He likely spent his first few days exploring the ship's decks, enjoying the fine meals, and marveling at the sheer scale and luxury of his surroundings. This was more than just a passage. It was an experience, a grand adventure leading to an even grander future. His decision to travel on the Titanic was, like for so many others, a matter of circumstance and ambition. He had important business to attend to in America, seeking to establish trade connections and build a new life. The books he carried were not just merchandise, they were his capital, the foundation of his future enterprise. Every moment on that ship, sailing westward across the calm Atlantic, brought him closer to realizing his goal. The journey was smooth, the weather was fine, and the future looked bright. No one, least of all a careful planner like Vaghinak, could have imagined the catastrophic turn his journey was about to take. On a massive ship like the Titanic, surrounded by thousands of strangers, it is natural for people to form connections. Vaghinak Byurat quickly found companionship with two other Armenian men. Their shared heritage and language created an instant bond in the vast, unfamiliar environment of the ocean liner. Their names were Neshan Krikorian and David Vartanian. The three men became a small, close-knit group. They would spend their time together, walking the decks, sharing meals in the second-class dining saloon, and talking about their hopes for the future that awaited them in America. These friendships provided comfort and a sense of home amidst the anonymous crowd. Their conversations were likely filled with plans and dreams. Perhaps they spoke of the businesses they would start, the families they hoped to build, or the relatives they were going to meet. For immigrants traveling to a new country, such friendships were invaluable. They offered mutual support and understanding in a way that no one else could. The three men, from different backgrounds but united by a common culture, would have explored the ship together, marveling at its opulence and the smooth, steady way it cut through the waves. The days passed calmly, strengthening their new friendship as the ship carried them farther and farther from the world they knew. As educated men, they likely engaged in deep discussions about politics, literature, and the opportunities that America offered. Vaghinak, with his scholarly background and collection of books, might have shared stories or debated ideas with his new friends. These interactions were a pleasant way to pass the time on the long voyage. The ship itself was a world of its own, and in their small corner of it, they created a community. They were more than just fellow passengers. They were allies, facing the great unknown of a new continent together. Their bond was a small, human detail in the grand, impersonal story of the Titanic's journey. This friendship would soon become a lifeline. When the peaceful voyage turned into a nightmare, their connection would be tested in the most extreme way imaginable. The trust and camaraderie they built during those calm days at sea would become crucial for their survival. They would have to rely on each other, make split-second decisions together, and face the unfolding chaos as a unit. The casual friendship forged over dining tables and deck chairs was about to transform into a desperate alliance against the cold, dark, and unforgiving Atlantic Ocean. Their shared journey was about to become a shared struggle for life itself. The night of April 14, 1912, began like any other on the voyage. The sea was calm, the sky was clear, and the ship moved steadily through the darkness. But for Vaghinak Byurat and his friends, the peace was shattered not by a shudder, but by a series of deafening explosions. He was awake in his cabin when he heard the terrible sounds coming from deep within the ship. It sounded like the boilers had burst. Immediately, he knew something was gravely wrong. He and his friends, Neshan and David, quickly dressed and rushed out to the deck to investigate. The scene that greeted them was one of growing confusion and alarm, not the orderly evacuation one might expect. On the deck, chaos was beginning to take hold. Smoke was billowing from the funnels, and the ship had come to a complete stop. The deck was starting to tilt at an alarming angle. Panic was spreading among the passengers, as crew members struggled to maintain order. Vaghinak and his friends realized they needed to act quickly. They saw the crew preparing the lifeboats, but it was a frantic and disorganized process. They decided their best chance was to stay together and try to find a way off the massive sinking ship. Their earlier friendship now became a pact for survival, as they navigated the crowded and sloping decks. Their first instinct was to try to get on a lifeboat. They watched as boats were filled, mostly with women and children, and then lowered away into the darkness. The process was slow, and there were not enough boats for everyone. As the ship's tilt grew more severe, it became harder to move around. Objects were sliding across the decks, and the sounds of screaming mixed with the groaning of the ship's metal frame. Vaghinak, Neshan, and David knew their chances of getting a spot on one of the remaining lifeboats were slim. They had to make an impossible choice: stay on the sinking vessel or risk their lives in the freezing water below. As the great ship's stern rose higher and higher into the air, they made their decision. The three friends climbed over the railing. They knew that staying on the ship meant certain death. Their only hope, however small, was in the water. They held on to each other, said their goodbyes, and with a final, desperate prayer, they jumped. They plunged into the black, icy depths of the Atlantic Ocean, a terrifying leap of faith into the unknown. The shock of the freezing water was immediate and breathtaking, a brutal start to their long fight for survival in the middle of the dark, silent sea. The moment Vaghinak hit the water, the cold seized him. It was a pain so intense it felt like being stabbed by thousands of needles all at once. The freezing temperature stole his breath and paralyzed his muscles. All around him was darkness, punctuated by the cries of hundreds of others who had also found themselves in the water. He had become separated from his friends, Nishan and David, in the chaos of the jump and the plunge. Now he was utterly alone, fighting to stay afloat in the vast, unforgiving ocean. His first instinct was to find something, anything to cling to. His life depended on it. He spotted a lifeboat nearby and, with every ounce of strength he had left, began to swim toward it. The water was thick with debris and other desperate survivors. Reaching the boat was a monumental effort. When he finally got there, his hands numb and his body shaking uncontrollably, he grabbed onto the side. But his hope turned to despair. The people in the lifeboat, fearing it would capsize, refused to let him in. They pushed his hands away, shouting at him to let go. It was a brutal, heart-wrenching rejection. To be so close to safety, only to have it denied, was a devastating blow to his already fading spirit. Forced to let go, Vaghinak was once again at the mercy of the sea. He felt his strength leaving him, the intense cold draining his will to live. He began to pray, preparing himself for the end. He thought of his family, his dreams of a new life in America, all of it sinking with him into the icy blackness. It was in this moment of absolute despair that he saw something else in the water, an overturned lifeboat. It was a collapsible boat, floating upside down, with several other men already clinging to its slippery surface. This was his last chance, a final, desperate opportunity for survival. Summoning a reserve of energy he did not know he possessed, he swam towards the overturned collapsible. This time, the men clinging to the boat helped him. They pulled him up onto the keel, out of the life-stealing water. There, balanced precariously with about 30 other men, Vaghinak spent the rest of the night. They were exposed to the freezing wind and the spray of the waves, their bodies numb and their minds reeling from the horror they had endured. They had to work together to balance the unstable craft, knowing that a single mistake could send them all back into the deadly water. It was a long, terrifying vigil under a star-filled sky. As dawn began to break on the horizon, a faint light appeared in the distance. It was a ship. For the men shivering on the overturned lifeboat, it was a sight that seemed too good to be true. The ship was the RMS Carpathia, which had heard the Titanic's distress calls and had been racing through the ice-filled waters all night to reach them. As it grew closer, hope surged through the exhausted survivors. The rescue was not immediate. The Carpathia had to first pick up the survivors in the other lifeboats. Vaghinak and his companions could only watch and wait, their strength fading with each passing minute. Finally, it was their turn. One of the Titanic's other lifeboats, now empty after transferring its passengers to the Carpathia, was rowed over to the overturned collapsible. The rescue was a delicate and difficult operation. One by one, the frozen, exhausted men were carefully transferred from their unstable refuge into the lifeboat. Many were too weak to move on their own, and had to be lifted and pulled to safety. Vaghinak, having survived the night against all odds, was among them. He was finally safe from the icy water that had claimed so many lives. The short journey from the lifeboat to the warm, bright decks of the Carpathia felt like a journey from death back to life. Once aboard the Carpathia, the survivors were met with overwhelming kindness. The crew and passengers gave them blankets, warm drinks, and medical attention. The ship was crowded with the rescued, a somber and shaken group of people who had just lived through an unimaginable nightmare. To his immense relief, Vaghinak was reunited with his friends, Nishan Krikorian and David Vartanian. Miraculously, all three of them had survived the night. They had jumped from the ship together, been separated in the water, and had each found their own way to safety before being rescued by the same ship. Their reunion was a moment of profound joy amidst the overwhelming sorrow. Vaghinak Byurat's survival remains a powerful story of human endurance. He lived a long life, but the memory of that night never left him. His unique account, which never mentioned an iceberg, adds a layer of mystery to the disaster. Did he simply not see it from his vantage point, or was there more to the sinking than the official story tells? We may never know for sure. What we do know is that Vaghinak Byurat faced an impossible situation with incredible courage. His story is not just about surviving a shipwreck, it is a testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of absolute terror and the will to live against all odds.